the Fan3Cast, dishing out the hottest NASCAR news and views while celebrating the three's historic comeback. Here are your hosts, Michael Metzger and Jason Schultz.
It was craziness on the Talladega Superspeedway that has led to Denny Hamlin becoming the 8th driver to win this year, and half the field of the chase drivers is locked in.
That craziness was until the final lap when some controversy struck with the final caution. We will get into that later. First, we're going to discuss Denny Hamlin's win, and which really was unexpected until really the finish came.
Yeah, it should not have been as unexpected as we had it. Remember, just a couple months ago, he was dominating at Daytona in the Speed Weeks and then ended up not finishing that well in the Daytona 500. We know he's strong at the plate tracks, and it's just took advantage of the opportunity of being up front in the right time, and that caution really did help him out.
When I'm making my pick for Talladega, I really didn't consider how he was winning those Speed Weeks. I really thought that he was probably the guy that was just the exhibition racer or restrictor plates and never really could get the job done when they got in the actual points races. So he definitely surprised me by winning, and he was not on my radar at all for the weekend. But now that I know he's been succeeding at the Daytona in February, and he won this race, he's definitely going to be probably one of the restrictor plate drivers everyone watches out for once Daytona in July comes around.
I think the end of the race was really weird. Kind of like what you said. We'll get into that in a little bit. It didn't feel like a normal Talladega race at the end. People kind of got blocked from making any sort of moves. But what I have to delve into, Jason, here is the man of the hour of the week, Brad Keselowski. So you had him involved in two incidences, one early, one middle of the race. One, not really anyone, but Jamie McMurray is affected. The second one is taking out a good number of vehicles. So I got to ask you, Jason, on that first incident between him and Danica Patrick, how do you call that? Either one's fault or just a racing deal?
I think it was mostly just a racing deal, and Brad did move down a little. He definitely thought he was clear. He moved down the track, and that wasn't clear. So I think it was a little at his fault, but pretty much overall really a racing deal. And I don't see anything Danica could have done differently. They were just really shuffling around at that point. And Brad probably did move down a little. I don't think he got overly mad at Danica for getting into him, which basically means to me that he thought maybe he just moved down too and was just a little too early with that move.
Yeah, I definitely have to agree with you. It's kind of just a racing incident. I'm going to place blame on both. I'm going to say that maybe Brad could have waited half a second to make that turn left to get in front of her, and then you can also argue that Danica maybe could have stepped on the brake or slowed up just a little bit to keep from making the contact, but you're racing that fast at Talladega, you're bound to have an instance like that. Now, Keselowski's second accident, so because of that first one, he had to have about 6 laps worth of repairs done to his vehicle. At the same time, Jamie McMurray that I mentioned before also needed about 6 laps to work on his car. So you have cars sitting 42nd and 43rd, 6 laps down, and they're kind of racing each other inside the race to be the lucky dog in the event that a caution comes out, they can get their laps back. Brad Keselowski, he's up by the front, he's racing with the leaders, trying to not only get on the lead lap there, but stay ahead of McMurray, and then he ends up spinning and taking out a bunch of cars. Do you blame Keselowski for kind of having that never quit attitude, racing with the leaders to try to get his lap back?
Yes, being 6 laps down, he really shouldn't be running up there that competitively and acting like he's on the dog going for the win. He really should have been, I don't know, maybe he should have been, farther towards the back, just riding around, because there wasn't that many cars that went off down in the race, and he was being 6 laps down, so he probably wasn't going to get those 6 laps back, and maybe if he just hung around at the back, he may have, one caution's come out, maybe got a lap back with this caution, that caution. I don't think there was any drivers he's really competing with for the lucky dog, so I don't think he should have been up there in the first place, and a bunch of other drivers now had torn up race cars because of him being a little over competitive and being in a place where he really shouldn't considering how many laps he was behind in the race.
I listened to MRN Motorsports Monday, where they actually have Brad Keselowski's spotter Joey Meyer join them to break down the action. He had a very compelling argument for why Brad was up there racing, trying to stay ahead of McMurray. He pointed to the fact that by the end of the race, McMurray was able to get 5 of his 6 laps back, which that's all fine and good, but I'm with you, Jason. I think if Keselowski's trying to get his lap back, he should have been in front of McMurray, but not necessarily at the front of the pack. Kind of one of those, keep an eye on where McMurray is. I want to be a couple cars ahead of him just in case the caution comes out, and not push the envelope like he had been. Because honestly, McMurray gets a lap back because of that caution, and then a couple other cautions come out, but there's no guarantee you're going to get those cautions to get those 6 laps back. They have a win. The whole point of this new point system is you have the ability to basically have mulligans throughout the season, so he could have just thrown away Talladega and just moved on, but he pushed the envelope, and hey, it did actually net him 7 more points because he ended up finishing about, I think it was 37th or 38th instead of 43rd.
The conclusion to the race at Talladega was definitely controversial, unlike last year where there was an incredible, exciting finish with David Ray and David Dillon, and this one was a lot more low-key when Denny Hamlin took the victory while he was on back stretch, won the caution out after a wreck involving Justin Allgaier and Alex Bowman occurred coming to the white flag, which really raised the question of the caution on the last lap. What do fans think of it? Is it really necessary? And my take on the whole thing is this NASCAR made the right call, first of all, with calling the caution because there was a giant piece of debris, and you don't want that to affect the ending or drivers running over that 200 miles per hour when they're coming to the finish. So they had to call the caution, but in the future, in these situations, maybe NASCAR should really scrap the white flag caution rule and just say if the caution comes out on the white flag before the checkered flag is waving, we'll do another restart. I don't really see a point in calling the race a lap early. When the race finishes, the checkered flag should be waving. It should not finish any time before the checkered flag is waving over the winner.
Yeah, that finish was kind of what I alluded to earlier. Dale Earnhardt Jr. was kind of laying back, waiting for everyone to crash, and then he wanted to make his way back up there. Just the end of the race was just weird, not typical Talladega, and I think even if they don't throw the caution flag, I think Hamlin still wins the race because it seemed like no one could really move on the outside unless you had a good couple of laps to do it. So unless you're making some sort of dive bomb move to the inside, no one was probably getting around Hamlin. And I have to agree with you. As soon as you started talking about that, I kept thinking, man, it's that last flag that ends it situation where they had enough time at Talladega at least to throw the caution, get them all back together and try a green-white checkered. What I can see in playing devil's advocate is if you're at a track like Bristol, you've taken the white flag, you're basically already halfway done with your lap, and something happens and you got to slow down the cars there, whereas Talladega, it's so large you could take the white flag, have something happen way behind you, and still have a good couple of minutes before you even come up on it.
New segment for Fan3Cast this week. We are taking some fan questions from Twitter. I tweeted out a few times asking fans for some questions, anything really NASCAR related. So we got 2 this week, and we already have 2 next week. Some people tweet a little later to us, so plenty of questions to answer. The first one is going to come from Wheeler Racing 16, and he wants to know what we believe to be the biggest change NASCAR has made this season. So, Mike, you can lead us off.
I would have to say the biggest change this season has been the point structure and putting the emphasis on winning. I think it's working out a lot better than what fans initially thought of when they heard the changes. Jason, you were a big proponent of the changes, so you have to be happy with me saying this. But I think this go for wins scenario is working out like even better than NASCAR could have imagined. And just look at Richmond 2 weeks ago with Kenseth and Keselowski battling tooth and nail to the finish, going for that win so they can get locked in.
And I do agree, and I'm glad you came around to liking the new system. And it's definitely the biggest change because the wins have become so much bigger and so much more important because that's all we're talking about on race day is the wins and how it's affecting how the drivers are racing. And hope I pronounced it on Twitter handle correctly. He wants to know if we think rookies Austin Dillon and Kyle Larson will make the chase field this season.
Ooh, that's a tough one. I really think both had the potential to get a win. I just don't know if it's going to happen before the cutoff at Richmond. Without that win, gosh, there's so many different factors, and I'm not even looking at a lack of experience. I'm just thinking that if we have, say, 14 different winners and there's only 2 spots, they're going to have to be darn near the top of the points to get in at that juncture. So I'm going to kind of skate by it, and I'm going to say it's very possible. I would not be shocked if they do, but at this point, I think it's a little too cloudy to say definitively yes or no.
Right, as of right now, I think Larson, yes, he'll make the chase, and Austin Dillon, I think just going to sit. Larson has shown so much talent and competitiveness that we really didn't expect out of him this season, so I wouldn't be surprised if he grabs a win, and there's so many opportunities before Chicagoland rolls around in September where he could grab a win. So I definitely see him grabbing one because he's just been so good, and drivers that are that good typically don't miss out on victory lane. So I think Larson's in, Dillon no, but if Larson doesn't grab a win, I think he'll be on the outside as well.
That was actually going to be my follow-up question to you. Do you think they get in with points or wins? So you're thinking more wins than points.
Yeah, I think if it's points, it's going to be one of the veterans. But if it's wins, definitely essential for the rookie.
All right, Jason. I have taken the honors of leading with my power rankings, and I'm sure people listening have been laughing at my power rankings because I put my faith in statistics. So I'm going to let you lead with who you have as your top 3 in the power rankings because I still got to think of an excuse to why I'm using statistics and not my head.
I will lead off. I went a different route in doing my power rankings this week. How they get so unpredictable. It's really hard to judge how the drivers do, how they're doing really overall in the season based off Talladega because it can be so wild. And we saw Logano, who was one of the strongest guys this season, wreck, and Gordon, who also was really consistent, he's wrecked. And so I just grabbed my same 3 from last week after Richmond and just reordered them based on how I thought they ran at Talladega. Kyle Busch will be my number 1 driver. He didn't wreck at Talladega. He was 3rd on the list last week, but he is showing some consistency, and he's got his 1 win. So I think he's in a good position. And second is Logano. He's just so strong, and he was playing really well before he wrecked. So he was just got caught up in someone else's mess. And that really doesn't take away from the great season he's had so far. And third, I had Jeff Gordon, who was just very consistent, and you would have probably seen him up front running and competing for the win if he hadn't wrecked. So next week after Kansas, I'll be able to probably reorder and stick some new guys up in my power rankings. But this week, just sticking with the same 3 because it's really hard to predict that for Talladega with the whole wildness that ensued.
Thank you. That actually worked for me. Because what you're saying was exactly what the statistics said. Because the top 10 that I had for my power rankings, which you can see on startandparkblog.com, they all had pretty crappy days at Talladega, but everyone who was behind them didn't have overly great days at Talladega, so there was no real big fluctuation in where everyone was seated. So I have the same 3 people that I rattled off last week. Jeff Gordon, he's leading the points. You can't really argue that, although he did have a terrible Talladega race. I had Jimmy Johnson 2nd and Brad Keselowski 3rd. Again, both of them didn't have that good of races, but no one really outshined them.
Speaking of Kansas, we're going to move on to that subject next. The first night race at Kansas is this weekend. The track installed like 2 years ago, but this is the first time NASCAR is going to run under light there. The ARCA series, I believe, raced a few times under light in the past, but it's NASCAR's turn to race at Kansas under lights, so it's going to be really interesting to see how the race plays out because we've never really seen the cars under lights at Kansas. So it's going to be a whole new ball game, and I'm just really interested to see how it turns out at 11 o'clock on Saturday night because we just don't know what's coming, and it could be nothing different normal Kansas, but at the same time, it could be something you've never seen before. So a lot of questions are going to be raised prior to the race, and they will be answered by the time the checkered flag falls on Saturday night.
I'm very curious to see how Kansas does from a ticket standpoint. I want to see what the crowd looks like, and if possible, see what kind of estimates that they have for tickets sold versus previous events. This date has been kind of a struggle for even Darlington to kind of sell over the past couple of years, especially due to a night race. It's a little maybe too early in the season for a night race because it's just a little too chilly out there for some fans, but I would be interested to see what kind of turnout Kansas Speedway has now with this date, especially if we're going to get to kind of a rocky 2015 where the whole schedule could be flipped around from what it is right now.
It's interesting you brought up the weather for maybe it's too cold at night race. I expected Darlington to be a very cold night, but actually it wasn't too bad of a night to sit out and watch the race. So it may be a little colder than usual for fans to watch the race, but I think the weather is probably going to be pretty moderate, and I don't think it's going to have too big of an effect. But if the weather changes drastically before Saturday night, it could definitely have that effect.
Well, a big wild card with the Kansas Speedway is not so much the time of the day, but the pavement that has been laid down. It's a fairly new surface that was put on the Speedway. It hasn't been worn in yet, so pretty much the bottom line is going to be the way to go. And there are some definite questions about tires because Goodyear and some NASCAR teams showed up there and tested. They're not going to even use those tires that they tested. Goodyear decided to go in a totally opposite direction, so that's more of a wild card to throw into what to expect with this race.
In addition to the tires being an issue, we have seen wrecks upon wrecks at this track since the new pavement was placed on the Speedway. These last two races just seem to have lots of cautions, lots of incidents, lots of cars in the wall. So it'll be interesting to see if that happens on Saturday night or it does not. Maybe it was just something to do with the service being really new. It's been, I think, almost 2 years or maybe just over 2 years now that it's been on. So maybe it was just some at first it was a little difficult to race on. Drivers didn't really get a handle on, and that's why they were running a little more than usual. But I'm definitely intrigued to see if we do see that amount of carnage again this weekend as we have seen in the last few Kansas races.
Heck, this was the race last year that even a bush went up in flames, right?
Yeah.
So no one's even safe. You're on the track, around the track, you could be a victim anywhere. But Jason, 43 cars will enter, only one will end up on top. Do we have our 9th driver in the chase, or will we see someone else get some bonus points for an additional win?
I think it's really hard to tell right now because it could easily go to Harvick or Logano again because they just seem to be so good, and they'll probably be so good on Saturday night. But I just have a feeling Clint Bowyer's going to do well. He's had a pretty phenomenal week. He got married about a month ago. I think he signed a contract extension with Michael Waltrip Racing for next season, and he is soon to be a father, so he's got a lot of things going for him right now, and I think he may have a victory to talk about after the weekend. So he's done well at Kansas, and he knows he wants to get a win in front of his hometown crowd, so I'm going to go with Mr. Bowyer for victory this weekend.
I was just going to say, added pressure, hometown boy, and 5 Hour Energy is sponsoring the race this weekend. His sponsor on the car. Side note on that, I'm glad that they finally came out with a cherry flavor. I was kind of sick of the mixed berry variety that they have, and the other ones just do nothing for me. So for me, I'm going to go with old 6-time Jimmy Johnson. I'm with you in the idea that I think we're going to get our 9th different winner at the Kansas Speedway. Why pick Johnson? Well, to be honest with you, I didn't have the stats in front of me, but I was just thinking about it. He can't go any further without picking up a win. He's Jimmy Johnson. He's got Chad Knaus. The Hendrick cars are running really well, and he's going to be going into, if he doesn't get it done here, he's going into the All-Star break and the Coca-Cola 600 where it's Charlotte and his team excels there. So I want to see him get the win at Kansas because I want the points in our pick'em, but I would not be surprised if he has a great run that leads into a momentous end of May for him.
And it's really hard to imagine that. It's already a week before the All-Star break, and Charlotte's coming up, so it's been a fast-moving season, and the All-Star break right after this race, I think that shock is going to people once the checkers flag falls on Saturday night.
It's getting to that point where you got to kind of put yourself in position either in the points or get those wins to get in the chase, because we're only talking 16 races from now that the cutoff is at Richmond, but those are going to be a quick 16 races.
Thanks for listening to the Fan3Cast. For more NASCAR coverage, check out StartandParkBlog.com and Turn4RacingNews.com. Follow along on Twitter at Fan3Cast, at StartandParkBlog, and at NASCARJason.